Coral Reef High in Miami, 1999. Prom night became a tragedy when the wealthy CEO's daughter disappeared without a trace. It remained a mystery until 6 years later, when a school janitor made a discovery that would resurrect every question left unanswered. Derek Castellanos was summoned to the long, deserted corridor of the school's basement, drawn there by the janitor's frantic tone. Miguel Santos, his uniform dusted over with years of forgotten broom bristles, presented a tarnished silver box he had unearthed from behind an old boiler room wall. Inside it lay something Derek recognized all too well, an heirloom belonging to his sister. Miguel's voice trembled as he explained, while they were doing renovation work, tearing down the old wall to replace it with a new computer lab, I noticed this box hidden in a cavity we uncovered. The engraving on top made my heart stop. Derek carefully opened it. The delicate script inside read, "Isabella, Sweet 16, Love, Papa." It was her prom keepsake, the exact piece she had taken with her on May 15th, 1999, the night she vanished forever. He steadied himself, his voice low but controlled. Where was it exactly? Miguel led Derek further down into the bowels of the school's basement. New walls and fresh tiles suggested a recent overhaul, but a false wall had concealed the box all along. It had been sealed there during a prior renovation, hidden in darkness and forgotten until now. 6 years of silence finally fractured by a dirty, dusty container and a name engraved in silver. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles north, another case lay dormant in Chicago. In 1998, billionaire real estate magnate William Thornton's adult twins vanished in the middle of holiday shopping at Millennium Mall. The case grabbed national headlines and generated thousands in search rewards, but eventually went cold. Then, 7 years later, a night shift security guard stumbled upon evidence that reignited the whole investigation. Tommy Rodriguez had logged nearly a decade walking the endless corridors of Millennium Mall. One night, a brick shifted under his boot near a basement storage entry. Something was off. Slowing down, he knelt under the dim glow of his flashlight and pried the brick free. Behind it, wrapped carefully in plastic film, lay a leather wallet and a silver bracelet. Tommy's pulse raced when he peeked inside the wallet. A driver's license bearing the name Jessica Marie Thornton, born March 15, 1976, plus another for her twin brother Joshua David Thornton. Both were 22 when issued in 1998. The photo matched the twins who disappeared on December 12th at Millennium Mall. Tommy remembered the frenzy, the missing persons posters, the celebrity news crews, Thornton offering a multi-million-dollar reward. But after 6 months, investigators ran out of leads and the case was shelved until now. He radioed in for backup. Within 30 minutes, Detective Sarah Chen appeared, flanked by a forensics crew, portable lights, and gloved hands. "These items belong to Jessica and Joshua Thornton," she said, inspecting the ID cards and brushing over the bracelet with initials. Rodriguez pointed at the sealed storage section. Chen realized this space had been renovated in 2001, so anything hidden there prior would have been permanently entombed behind drywall and tile. With a camera, she photographed every detail: the surprisingly intact wallet, the plastic wrap that had protected it from decay. Inside the wallet, credit cards rested beside exactly $43 in bills and a crumpled receipt dated December 12, 1998, at 3:47 p.m. from Radio Shack. "They were still here at that time," Chen noted out loud. "This receipt isn't just evidence. It's a timestamp anchored to the day they vanished." Rodriguez, thinking back, recalled his night shift began at 6 p.m., long after the twins supposedly vanished during the day. Daytime security was on duty earlier, and the chain of command pointed to Frank Morrison, head of security at the time. Chen scribbled down the name. Rodriguez added context. "Morrison retired in 2003. Lives in Naperville now. Really good guy. Worked here 15 years. Chen secured the physical evidence in sealed bags. her mind racing at the implications. The original theory had been that the twins left the building via an exit camera didn't cover, but these personal effects, found buried inside the mall's structure, suggested otherwise. Someone in the building might have known more than they revealed. At nearly 2 a.m, Chen drove to notify William Thornton in Wetka, where his lakeside estate sat behind imposing iron gates. She pressed the intercom button. "Mr. Thornton, Detective Chen with Chicago PD." The gates swung open immediately. Thornton, wearing a bathrobe, greeted her at the front door. He looked worn. At 58, his hair mostly gray, deep lines around his eyes betraying 7 years of anguish. "Detective, what have you found?" he asked, voice cracking just slightly. Chen produced photographs of the wallet and bracelet, clear images, dated and labeled. Thornton's hands trembled as he studied them. "She never went anywhere without that wallet," he said of Jessica. "And Joshua wore that bracelet every single day since high school." Silent tears shimmered in his eyes. They were in the mall the whole time. It hit him. The kids never left. The crime scene may have been inside the building, not outside in the parking lot. Thornton sighed and sank into his leather chair. Chen asked him to recount the day. He paused, glancing at framed family photos on his desk before speaking. At roughly 2 p.m. on December 12th, they entered Millennium Mall to do Christmas shopping for their mother and younger sister. They were supposed to meet friends for dinner at 7 p.m., but they never showed. Their car remained in the mall parking lot the following morning. Its keys, missing, yet no sign of struggle or forced entry. Security footage captured them walking in shortly after 2:15 p.m., but no footage of them exiting. Reviewing old police notes, Chen observed that the investigation closed with the assumption they'd exited through a blind spot and vanished elsewhere. But Thornton disputed entirely. No, they were still inside. They couldn't have escaped voluntarily. Someone at that mall was hiding the truth. Chen promised to reinvestigate aggressively. The discovery of these hidden artifacts recalibrated the case from lost persons to likely homicide, and added suspicion of someone inside taking action to conceal evidence for years. At dawn, Chen returned to the mall site. She crouched beside the basement storage section where Rodriguez had found the items. She noted the location of the hidden cavity and how it aligned with renovation blueprints from 2001, which had turned that corner of the building into storage. Anyone who buried those personal items must have known renovation plans in advance. Someone with inside access. Rodriguez joined her at the early morning briefing. "Detective," he said, eyes serious. "I've been thinking—" Frank Morrison had been the one overseeing the 2001 renovation at Millennium Mall. He would have had precise knowledge of which parts of the structure were to be sealed, walled off, or paved over. Detective Sarah Chen dialed the landline listed for his residence. A woman answered, her tone cautious. "Mrs. Morrison, this is Detective Chen with the Chicago Police Department," she said. "Is your husband available to speak?" "He's out at a doctor's appointment," the woman replied. "Is something wrong, Detective?" "We've come across some materials linked to an old investigation at Millennium Mall. I'd appreciate an opportunity to speak with him regarding his work there, especially his time as the head of mall security." There was a pause. "That job nearly broke him," she finally said. "All the stress. He hasn't spoken about the mall in years." "What kind of materials did you find?" Chen kept her tone even, her words intentionally vague. "Some personal belongings from a missing persons case. We believe your husband might remember the incident. The Thornton twins." The mention drew a soft gasp. Frank took that case hard. He blamed himself for what happened. It haunted him for years. He should be home around noon. With time to spare, Chen dug through the 1998 case files again. Numerous witness accounts placed Jessica and Joshua Thornton at various spots inside the mall from mid-afternoon onward. Between 2:15 p.m. and 5:30 p.m., they'd been seen together and separately. Jessica ordering a coffee at Starbucks around 5:15, and Joshua perusing gadgets at Best Buy around the same time. Nothing afterward. Morrison had already been interviewed back then. His statements were meticulous and matched security logs. He'd assisted, with search coordination, shared surveillance footage, and even worked unpaid hours during the crucial first weeks. His record had raised no red flags, yet none of that could explain how the twins' items ended up sealed behind a false wall. Someone who knew about the renovation plan, who understood which areas would soon be inaccessible, had intentionally hidden those possessions. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was planned, and it was precise. Her phone buzzed. Rodriguez's voice crackled on the line. "Detective, I think I found something else. Remember that storage space? I came back with stronger lighting. There's a patch of newer concrete, maybe 3 by 6 feet. Different shade, doesn't match the surrounding floor." Chen's chest tightened. "Don't touch anything. Secure the area. I'm bringing in forensics now." What had begun with a wallet and bracelet was unraveling into something far more sinister. 7 years of silence were about to be broken. With urgency, Chen returned to Millennium Mall, accompanied by a forensics unit and ground-penetrating radar. The basement area was sealed off with caution tape. Mall operations manager David Kim looked visibly distressed. "Detective, you realize we're in peak holiday traffic? I've got delivery trucks delayed and angry shoppers." Chen didn't blink. "This area is now part of an active homicide investigation. We'll take as long as needed." Maria Santos, a radar technician, set up her equipment over the suspicious slab. She adjusted the scanner, eyeing the screen carefully. "There's a clear anomaly about 6 feet down," she reported. "Rectangular. There's metal, and something else, possibly organic. The concrete over it was poured differently. It wasn't part of the original flooring." Chen's jaw clenched. She placed a call to the Cook County Coroner's Office, requesting immediate dispatch of a forensic excavation team. 2 hours later, Dr. Elizabeth Harper arrived. As the city's top forensic pathologist, Harper was seasoned in discovering long-buried secrets. She reviewed the radar data, her expression unreadable. This was a deliberate concealment. Someone poured this concrete to cover something permanently. This isn't careless, it's calculated. David Kim was flustered. This renovation was done 4 years ago. It went through the proper city inspections. We had contracts, permits. Everything was by the book. Chen, already ahead of him, had pulled the building permits. The renovation had been awarded to Morrison Construction Company. The firm's president? Robert Morrison, Frank's younger brother. Interesting. One brother is in charge of mall security, the other is in charge of sealing the basement. Chen took note of the coincidence. While Harper's team prepared the excavation zone, Chen drove out to Neepville. The Morrison residence was a modest split-level home on a quiet street. Frank opened the door, slowly. His appearance was that of a man worn down by time, gray hair, weary eyes, and a Chicago Bears sweatshirt that hung loosely from his frame. "You called about the mall," he said before she could introduce herself. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Yes, we've uncovered evidence tied to the Thornton twins," she said. Items were found in the basement, hidden behind a loose brick wrapped in plastic. Their belongings were concealed intentionally. Frank's face drained of color. "But we searched everything. Every room, every hallway. There's no way we missed that." Chen studied him carefully. His reaction felt genuine. Shock mingled with guilt. "Tell me about the 2001 renovation." He exhaled, collapsing into a recliner. "Just standard upgrades. Flooring, lighting, rewired security. Robert's company got the job." "Who had access during the work?" "Construction crews, upper mall staff, and security. Maybe 12 people total. I don't remember anything unusual." Chen stepped closer. "We're digging into that concrete slab in the basement today. If there's something you know, anything, it would be best to share now." Frank stood abruptly. "I think I need a lawyer." "You're not under arrest," Chen said gently. "I just need the truth." His hands trembled. "I gave 15 years of my life to that mall. When those kids vanished, it shattered me. I couldn't sleep. I stopped eating. Eventually, I had to walk away from everything." Chen watched him closely. "What happened on December 12th, 1998? Frank turned to the window. staring into his small backyard. I replay that day constantly. Every decision, every missed moment. I should have had more eyes on the ground, more patrols. He hesitated. Especially the loading docks. That struck a chord. Why the loading docks? No cameras back there, he murmured. Blind spots. If someone wanted to move something, or someone unseen, that's where they do it. Move what? She asked. Just then, his wife entered with a tray of coffee, pausing at the tension in the room. She looked at Frank, concern etched across her face. You look awful. What's going on? They found the Thornton kids' things at the mall, he said. Her breath caught. After all this time, where? Chen remained quiet, observing their reactions. Frank Morrison's silence was deliberate, but his eyes were saying far more than his words. He glanced toward his wife. An unspoken message passed between them. Chen noticed. Something about their exchange was just off. Mrs. Morrison, she asked gently, did your husband ever speak about the Thornton case at home? The woman nodded solemnly. He was obsessed with it, barely slept for months afterward. Even though everyone told him he did everything he could, Frank blamed himself. He never forgave what happened under his watch. Did he ever mention any suspects? Chen pressed. Any theories about what happened to the twins? Before she could finish the thought, Frank cut in sharply. Detective, I need to call my attorney before I say anything more. Chen paused, then nodded and left her card on the hallway table. Call me when you're ready to talk. Tonight, tomorrow, whenever you can. As she walked back to her vehicle, her phone was already ringing. She answered, recognizing William Thornton's number on the screen. The man's voice trembled. You said excavation has started? He asked. Yes, Mr. Thornton. We've begun removing the concrete flooring in the basement storage area, she replied cautiously. Are you saying my children are buried in that mall? His voice cracked under the weight of those words. We don't know that yet, Chen said carefully. The radar indicated something beneath the surface. Until we finish excavation, we can't make any conclusions. I'm coming down there. Sir, this process could take hours, days even. You might be more comfortable waiting for updates at... I've waited 7 years, Detective, Thornton said, resolute. I'm not going to wait one more minute at home. By the time Thornton arrived, the crew had broken through the surface layer. Underneath the concrete lay compacted dirt, fragments of wood, and chunks of construction debris. Dr. Elizabeth Harper supervised the excavation, guiding workers who were now digging carefully by hand, sifting through the soil with trowels and brushes. At exactly 4 p.m., one of the forensic specialists froze. A moment later, Harper called Chen over. We have remains, she said soberly. Human bones, more than one set. Chen's stomach turned. After 7 years of uncertainty, of rumors and false sightings, the Thornton family was about to face the harshest truth. She asked, How long before we can confirm? Preliminary ID within 24 hours. But a full analysis, dental DNA, will take several weeks. As they expanded the dig site, William Thornton stood nearby, hands clenched. Chen approached him slowly. Mr. Thornton, she began, we've discovered human remains. While we can't confirm identity yet, the location and condition match the evidence we've gathered. Thornton's hand shot out and gripped her forearm. Are both of them there? He asked, voice breaking. It appears so, she said softly. I'm very sorry. Thornton collapsed onto a nearby bench, face buried in his hands. For 7 long years, he'd clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, his children had run off, fled the country, started over. But the truth had been buried in concrete beneath a shopping mall. They hadn't disappeared. They'd been hidden. Chen's phone vibrated. A text message flashed across the screen. From Frank Morrison. I need to tell you everything. Can you come back tonight? Chen stared at the message for a long moment. Finally, the excavation continued under high-powered floodlights as darkness fell. Security directed customers away from the cordoned-off wing. By midnight, they'd recovered not only skeletal remains but also personal effects. Rings, bracelets, tattered clothing fragments, a single tennis shoe caked in dried mud. Dr. Harper took stock. 2 individuals, 1 male, 1 female. Based on attire, jewelry, and preliminary bone assessment, early 20s. This fits the timeline. It was time to confront the past. Chen dialed Morrison. He picked up immediately. "I've been waiting for your call," he said. "Are you ready to tell me what really happened?" "Yes, but not on the phone. Can you come to my house?" Chen nodded to herself, then flagged her partner, Detective Jim Walsh. Together they drove through the quiet streets of Neepville. At 1 a.m., Frank Morrison opened the door. His wife was already asleep upstairs. He led them downstairs to a cluttered home office filled with dusty folders, years-old mall security logs, and outdated floor plans. He didn't waste time. "I need to tell you about Vincent Koff," Morrison said, sitting down heavily. "Who is that?" Chen asked, flipping open her notebook. "He was the assistant mall manager in 1998. He ran evening operations, dealt with store vendors, and controlled loading dock schedules." Walsh narrowed his eyes. "Why are you bringing him up now?" "Because he was stealing, systematically, for years, from nearly every tenant in that mall." "How?" Chen asked. "Koff had master keys to every store. After hours, he'd skim from registers, swipe merchandise, tweak inventory logs to hide the losses. He covered his tracks well, manipulated system reports, ran fake maintenance orders. It was complex, but it was profitable." Walsh leaned in. "And you knew this?" Morrison pulled out a thick folder from a filing cabinet. Inside were printed screenshots, old surveillance stills, itemized discrepancy reports, and handwritten memos. "I spent months building a case against him," Morrison said. "Surveillance footage, employee statements, sales reports cross-checked with closing registers." "Then why didn't you report it?" Chen asked. "I tried," Morrison whispered. "But Koff was the nephew of one of the mall's principal investors. When I took it to the board, they told me to back off. Said I could keep my job if I kept quiet." Walsh flipped through the documents. "This is more than enough. He could have faced federal charges." Morrison nodded. "By December 1998, I was preparing to go to the FBI. Koff was guilty of wire fraud, tax evasion, and racketeering. I had enough to bury him." Chen connected the dots. "The twins vanished on December 12th. What happened that day?" Morrison closed his eyes and rubbed his forehead. "Jessica and Joshua were in Radio Shack around 3:30 p.m. That's when it happened. The store was being robbed. 2 men. They were working with Koff." Chen's heart dropped. "The Thornton twins walked in mid-robbery?" "Yes," Morrison said, voice brittle. "They saw everything. And worse, Joshua recognized one of the robbers. Tommy Benedetto, a classmate from high school. Joshua called him out by name." "Wrong place, wrong time," Walsh muttered. "Exactly," Morrison said. "Benedetto panicked. They weren't expecting witnesses. He forced both twins into the service corridor. I had no idea this was going on." "The Radio Shack manager didn't report it?" "He was too scared, kept his mouth shut." "So how did you find out?" Chen asked. "Koff came to my office that evening, around 6, said there'd been an incident, claimed a couple of shoppers had gotten lost, wandered into off-limits areas. He asked me to help resolve it quietly." "You believed him?" "I did, at first. Koff was charming, convincing. Told me the twins had left safely, that he'd walked them to their car himself." Morrison stood and began pacing the room, his guilt mounting. "But something didn't sit right. So I pulled the security footage, checked every exit camera. The twins were never seen leaving after 5:30 p.m. I knew then they were still inside." Walsh leaned forward. "What did you do?" "I confronted Koff. That's when the truth spilled out. The robbery, the panic, the cover-up." Frank Morrison's words were almost too quiet to hear. "Koff said they were already dead," he confessed, eyes brimming with tears. "Benedetto killed them. Said they couldn't risk being identified. They left their bodies in the loading dock storage room." Chen felt a sickening chill crawl up her spine. The puzzle pieces were locking into place, each more horrifying than the last. "Show me everything," she said, her voice low and steady. "Everything you know about what happened next." Morrison reached for a second folder from his cluttered desk. Inside were mall blueprints, construction permits, and internal renovation schedules. The papers were wrinkled and annotated, some stained with ink smudges and sweat. Morrison spread them on the table. Koff planned for this. He knew about the renovation long before it began, knew that basement space would be walled off and repurposed. He had keys, master codes, blueprints. Morrison continued. He didn't just hide evidence, he engineered a cover-up. That false concrete floor, he knew exactly when it would be poured. He even altered schedules to line up the burial. Walsh scanned the documents. "Your brother's company handled the renovation, right?" Morrison nodded solemnly. "Robert knew nothing. Koff used my name to request updates, get behind-the-scenes access. He made it seem like I was coordinating security oversight for the project. My brother thought everything was above board." Chen narrowed her eyes. "Then why didn't you stop him? Why not go to the police?" Morrison's facade cracked. His shoulders slumped, and he covered his face with trembling hands. "He threatened my family," he whispered. "Koff had photos of my wife, my daughter. Said they'd vanish just like the Thornton twins if I opened my mouth." Walsh's voice was sharp. "So you let it happen. You let him bury 2 murdered kids beneath a shopping mall." "I didn't help," Morrison choked out. "But I didn't stop him either. I told myself I was protecting my family, but deep down, I knew it was wrong." Chen's expression was unreadable as she flipped through Morrison's documentation. "He buried them, poured the concrete himself?" "Yes," Morrison said. "He orchestrated everything. It was January 15th, 2001, a Sunday night. The mall was closed. He retrieved the bodies from the industrial freezer in the loading dock and moved them to the basement." "Wait," Walsh interrupted. "Freezer? Are you saying those bodies were stored for 2 years?" "Yes," Morrison replied, barely audible. "He kept them hidden inside a freezer he had keys for. Said he'd take care of it when the time came. That freezer was sealed off in 2001. Walsh stood abruptly, furious. "You let him store 2 murdered kids like meat for 2 years? I was terrified," Morrison cried. "Koff was dangerous, connected. I knew he was tied to Eastern European mob families. He bragged about it, said no one could touch him." Chen steadied her voice. "Walk me through what happened the night of the burial." Morrison referred to his scribbled notes. It was dark. Koff dug the graves himself in the unfinished basement space. He layered the remains with dirt, bits of drywall, wiring, construction debris, anything that would blend in. Next morning, he poured fresh concrete and told the crew that I'd ordered extra security flooring. Walsh was flipping through the renovation files. "Your brother signed off on it." "He trusted me," Morrison said, and Koff made it look routine. Chen snapped her notebook shut. "Mr. Morrison, you're going to need that lawyer now." Surprisingly, Morrison nodded. "I know, but I can't carry this secret anymore. Not after all these years. Those kids, they didn't deserve what happened." Chen contacted the district attorney's office immediately, securing a statement about Morrison's voluntary confession. At the same time, she issued a new BOLO alert for Vincent Koff, now the prime suspect in a double homicide and a federal fugitive. At dawn, Chen returned to Millennium Mall. The scene was sealed under floodlights. Forensic teams had unearthed full skeletons, alongside scraps of clothing, jewelry, and shoes. Dr. Harper approached Chen with a solemn look. "Both sets of remains are complete. There are visible signs of trauma. Based on early analysis, the cause of death appears to be blunt force injuries to the skull, likely beatings." Chen picked up her phone and dialed William Thornton. When he answered, she delivered the news as gently as she could. "Mr. Thornton, your children were murdered and hidden inside the mall. We have full remains. I also have a signed confession from Frank Morrison and documented evidence of the crime." Thornton didn't respond immediately. For several seconds, there was only silence. Then, "Are the people who did this still alive?" "One of them, Tommy Benedetto, died in a car crash 6 months after the crime, but the other, Vincent Koff, vanished in early 1999. We believe he escaped before he could be arrested. Find him, Thornton said, his voice shaking. I want justice. I've waited long enough. Chen swore to follow every lead. Morrison's confession had resolved the mystery, but until Koff was found, there could be no closure. The following morning, Chen shifted her focus. She dove deep into Vincent Koff's past. Born in Brighton Beach, Brooklyn, in 1965, Koff was the son of Russian immigrants. He relocated to Chicago in 1995 and was hired as an assistant manager at Millennium Mall just 6 months later. On paper, his record was clean, but whispers of deeper connections soon surfaced. Chen's partner, Walsh, returned from canvassing former mall staff. Everyone hated the guy, he reported. Arrogant, flashy, expensive taste, custom suits, foreign cars, easily spending triple what a guy on 40 grand a year should. Chen examined his employment records. One detail leapt out. Koff's uncle, Dmitry Vulov, was part of the investment group behind the mall's development. Vulov also held major stakes in restaurants, construction firms, and import businesses across Chicago's Russian-American community. So that's how he got the job, Chen said. Nepotism, and probably protection too? Walsh nodded. I reached out to the FBI's organized crime unit. They've been tracking the Vulov family since the mid-90s. Money laundering, racketeering, weapons trafficking. You name it. Chen contacted Agent Maria Santos, an FBI specialist in Eastern European crime rings. Santos was blunt. Koff was already on our radar, she said. He disappeared just days before we planned to arrest half the Vulov organization. You think he fled the country? Most likely, Santos replied. Back to Russia or maybe Belarus. These guys have safe houses, multiple passports, and deep connections. Once they're gone, they vanish. Chen requested every FBI document related to Vincent Koff and the Vulov family. She also reached out to Interpol, activating international tracking alerts for any alias tied to Koff since 1999. She had names, she had motives, she had a confession. But until she had Koff in custody, this nightmare wasn't over. Inside the stark white walls of the Cook County Coroner's Office, Dr. Elizabeth Harper stood before Detective Chen with somber eyes. She had completed the preliminary autopsies on the Thornton twins. What she revealed was far worse than Chen had anticipated. They didn't just die, Detective, Harper said, her voice low. They were brutalized. Jessica and Joshua Thornton had suffered multiple traumatic injuries before their deaths. Harper laid out the grim details. Severe skull fractures from repeated blunt force, numerous broken ribs, and defensive wounds along their hands, forearms, and elbows. These were not instantaneous killings. The twins had fought desperately. They were conscious, Harper explained. They were aware of what was happening. They tried to defend themselves. Chen flipped through the autopsy photographs with a cold, sinking weight in her chest. How long would something like this have taken? Harper's expression was grave. At least 20 to 30 minutes, maybe longer. The wounds aren't consistent with a frenzied, panicked assault. This was prolonged, methodical. Someone took their time. Could one person have inflicted all of this? Harper shook her head. Number, the angles and variations in the injuries, especially those to the lower extremities, suggest more than one attacker. We're looking at 2, possibly 3 individuals. Chen stepped into the hallway and called Frank Morrison. His voice trembled as he answered. You told us Benedetto killed the twins, she said. Were others involved? There was a long pause on the line. Koff. He mentioned others, Morrison admitted. Russians. Men who worked for his uncle. I think they helped. He didn't say exactly what they did, but it sounded sadistic. You said this was a robbery gone wrong, Chen snapped. Was it more than that? Morrison's voice cracked. I think Koff lied to me, a lot. He said the twins weren't killed right away. He held them in the storage room, hours, maybe longer. Said he had to decide what to do. Chen closed her eyes, bile rising in her throat. Where exactly? Back loading dock, It's soundproofed, isolated. Koff used it to stash stolen merchandise and other illegal things. No one questioned it. Chen hung up and immediately called William Thornton. He deserved to know. "Mr. Thornton," she began gently, "the autopsy has revealed new information. Jessica and Joshua weren't just murdered. They were held and tortured before they died." The line went silent. Chen could hear only the faint sound of Thornton's unsteady breathing. When he finally spoke, his voice was frozen, emotionless. "Detective, I want you to listen carefully. I have more money than time. And I swear to you, I will spend every cent, every second I have left to hunt down the people responsible. If your justice system can't bring them back here, I'll find another way." "Mr. Thornton, please," Chen said, trying to keep her voice calm. "We understand your pain, but vigilante action—" "My children suffered," he interrupted, his tone rising. "For hours. They were children. And the law had 7 years to find them. 7 years too late." That same afternoon, Chen's phone buzzed with a New York number. It was Detective Tony Russo, Brighton Beach Precinct. He had intel on the Vulov family. "We've been monitoring Dmitry Vulov's financials since his nephew vanished," Russo explained. "A lot of funds are being wired to accounts in Moscow and St. Petersburg. He's also purchased several properties overseas. There's no direct mention of Koff, but the recipient of those wire transfers could be him. No one else in the family is missing." Chen requested copies of all banking records and property deeds. If Koffwares is alive and being supported abroad, she needs to know how and where. She also contacted the State Department to inquire about extradition. The response came quickly and discouragingly. "If Koff has claimed Russian citizenship," the legal advisor told her, "Russia will not extradite. They do not hand over their citizens for foreign prosecution." Chen was undeterred. She spent that evening combing through Koff's academic and personal history, hoping some forgotten lead might crack open his location. She discovered that Koff had attended Northwestern University from 1987 to 1991. He studied finance, focused his senior thesis on international laundering systems and banking loopholes, and spoke 3 languages fluently: English, Russian, and German. But what stood out most was a name in his file: Anna Petrov, a college girlfriend, daughter of Russian immigrants just like Koff. Records showed she now lived in Forest Hills, Queens, and had changed her last name through marriage to Martinez. The next morning, Chen boarded a flight to New York. Anna Martinez opened the door, holding a toddler on her hip. She looked surprised when Chen introduced herself. "Vincent?" Anna asked. "I haven't spoken to him since college. We're investigating a double homicide." "Vincent disappeared not long after," Chen said. Anna went pale. "He always scared me," she admitted. "Even back then, he had friends, dark connections. I broke it off after he threatened someone I knew." "Did he ever contact you again?" Chen asked. "Once," Anna whispered. "About 3 years ago. He called out of nowhere. Said he was doing fine, living somewhere safe. He wanted to know if I was happy." "Did he say where he was living?" "Not directly. He mentioned long nights, cold weather. I figured Russia. Maybe St. Petersburg." Chen showed her digitally aged renderings of Koff. "Could you recognize him today?" "Hard to say," Anna said, eyes scanning the images. "He was good at disguises, haircuts, glasses, posture. But his eyes were always cold." Calculating, Chen gave her a card. "If he ever contacts you again, call me immediately." Flying back to Chicago, Chen considered everything she'd gathered. Koff was likely alive, likely in Russia, and he wasn't alone. Morrison's notes had identified 3 Russian enforcers involved in the twins' torture and murder: Boris Petrov, Evgeny Vulov, and Alexei Sokolov. Chen ran background checks. Boris Petrov had been killed in a car bombing in 2002. Evgeny, Dmitry Vulov's son, was in federal prison for racketeering. Sokolov had disappeared in early 1999, same time as Koff. 2 down, 2 unaccounted for. Chen called FBI agent Maria Santos again. I need help locating two fugitives, Vincent Koff and Alexei Sokolov. They disappeared around the same time. I think they fled to Russia together. I'll contact our liaison in Moscow, Santos said. But you know the drill. Even if we find them, getting them extradited is next to impossible. Chen nodded. Do it anyway. She had uncovered the truth. She had identified the killers. Now came the most difficult part, bringing them to justice. Because 7 years had been far too long already. William Thornton had endured 7 years of silence, grief, and torment. Now that the truth had surfaced, he wasn't going to sit idly by. His children had been tortured and buried beneath concrete like discarded evidence, and the man responsible, Vincent Koff, was still out there living freely. For Thornton, justice was no longer a concept tied to procedure. It was a mission. Meanwhile, the international manhunt for Koff was accelerating. Early Thursday morning, FBI agent Maria Santos called Detective Chen with a long-awaited update. Our contacts in Moscow confirmed that Koff is alive, she said. He's living under the alias Victor Koff in St. Petersburg. Chen grabbed her notebook. What's he doing there? Managing financial operations for the Bradford crime families, Santos replied. Primarily money laundering through offshore accounts and dummy corporations. He's running high-level schemes now. Chen's voice sharpened. Is he untouchable? In Russia? Politically, yes. We'd never get him out of there. But there's good news. He's not staying put. He's been traveling often to places where we do have extradition treaties. Germany, France, and the Czech Republic. He's trying to expand his reach in Western Europe. So we wait for him to step outside Russian protection, Chen muttered. Santos offered something better. We have a window. Koff is scheduled to attend a financial summit in Prague next month. He's already reserved a suite at the Grand Hotel Bohemia. Czech Republic honors extradition requests from the U.S. with a high success rate. It was the most hopeful lead they'd had in days. Can we get an arrest warrant in time? We're already drafting it, Santos said. Frank Morrison's signed confession, the forensic evidence, autopsy reports. It's a strong package. We're coordinating with Interpol and Czech authorities. While the FBI handled the international logistics, Chen turned to her own task, fortifying the case. She revisited every angle of the original 1998 investigation, interviewing dozens of former employees and vendors from Millennium Mall. Paul Chen, the Radio Shack manager from that night, no relation, had never reported the armed robbery. When Chen asked why, he broke down. Koff threatened my wife and daughter. He said if I went to the police, we'd disappear too. I've lived with that fear every day since. At Best Buy, assistant manager Linda Williams recalled seeing Koff in the service corridors around 5:30 p.m. on the day of the twins' disappearance. He was anxious, pacing, checking his watch. Looked like he was waiting for something or someone. Starbucks barista. Jessica Rodriguez had one of the final memories of Jessica Thornton alive. She ordered a peppermint mocha around 5:15, Rodriguez said. She was smiling, said she was meeting her brother soon and they'd head home. Each account reinforced the timeline built from Morrison's confession. More than that, they proved Koff was not just a criminal. He was operating a system of fear and manipulation across the entire mall. Tony Kim, a food court vendor, described being extorted. He said if I didn't pay him weekly, health inspectors would find violations and shut me down. Sarah Gold, who managed the mall's jewelry boutique, described similar threats. Koff would demand items, watches, necklaces, for his girlfriends. He said it was easier than dealing with burglars. The pattern was unmistakable. Koff had turned Millennium Mall into his personal fiefdom, extorting, threatening, intimidating. And when the Thornton twins walked in on one of his schemes, he erased them. By Friday, Chen received unsettling news. William Thornton had hired a global private investigations firm with offices in Zurich and Vienna. Their operatives had already tracked Koff's presence in Europe. Chen immediately contacted Thornton. You're interfering with an active international investigation. If your people get involved, you could compromise everything. Thornton was unmoved. My children were murdered in the most horrific way imaginable. I waited for your justice system for 7 years. How much longer should I wait? We're days away from submitting the final extradition request. Please let the authorities handle this." Thornton hung up. That evening, Chen received another call, this time from Inspector Carol Novak with Prague Police. "Detective Chen," she said in a thick Czech accent, "your FBI colleagues alerted us to your suspect. We've been watching him. You've seen him?" "Not yet, but we're aware of his upcoming visit. He's reserved a room at the Grand Hotel Bohemia for January 15th. The summit is for Eastern European investors. His cover. Will you arrest him?" "Once we receive the official paperwork from your government, but he's cautious. If he senses surveillance, he'll vanish." FBI agent Santos joined the call. "Inspector Novak, what's his current front operation?" "He runs a consultancy that moves money between Russia and European banks, sophisticated shell companies, offshore holdings. Nearly impossible to prove fraud unless we catch him red-handed." Chen asked, "What about his known associate, Alexei Sakhalov?" A pause. "He's dead. Gang violence in Moscow 6 months ago. Shot multiple times outside a nightclub. Likely a power struggle. One less killer walking free. Only Koff remained." Over the weekend, Chen buried herself in the logistics. She assembled complete evidence packets for the U.S. Department of Justice, Czech prosecutors, and Interpol. Every detail, witness accounts, forensic findings, Morrison's full confession, was included. She also studied Prague's city maps and the layout of the Grand Hotel Bohemia. If Koff sensed a trap, he might try to escape through underground service routes, rooftops, or back alleys. Czech police needed to be ready. By Monday morning, disaster loomed. Thornton had left Chicago for Europe. No destination given. His secretary wouldn't confirm his plans. "Mr. Thornton left standing orders not to share any travel details with law enforcement," she said. Chen reported this immediately to Santos. "We have a serious problem," she warned. "Thornton is trying to capture Koff on his own." Santos was alarmed. "If he or his people spook Koff, we lose our chance forever." On Tuesday afternoon, Inspector Novak called again. "We have American investigators asking around Prague. Questions about your suspect." Chen's heart sank. How dangerous is this? Koff has armed guards, Russian mob connections. If he feels cornered, he could retaliate violently or disappear before the conference even begins. There was no time to waste. Chen booked a seat on the earliest outbound flight to Prague. She had to stop Thornton's vigilante mission before it destroyed years of work, and the only shot at justice the Thornton family might ever get. With Agent Santos coordinating operations from FBI headquarters in Washington, Detective Sarah Chen took on the high-stakes task of managing events on the ground in Prague. But before she left Chicago, there was one more person she needed to see: Frank Morrison. Now under house arrest in a modest suburban home, Morrison had been cooperating fully with prosecutors. He met Chen at the door, looking older than ever. His eyes were bloodshot, shoulders slumped as though the weight of 7 years of guilt had permanently bent his spine. "Frank," Chen said gravely, "if Koff escapes because someone interferes, Jessica and Joshua's deaths might never be avenged. You owe them better." Morrison nodded, eyes wet. "Detective, I should have stopped all of this 7 years ago. Instead, I let fear decide for me. And now, that poor man, Thornton, he might die trying to do what I didn't have the courage to." Chen left Morrison knowing the past couldn't be changed, but the future still could. Her mission now was to stop William Thornton from destroying everything they'd built. The case that had started with a dusty jewelry box behind a school boiler wall had escalated into an international pursuit. From a long-buried secret in Miami to the cobblestone streets of Prague, everything was converging for a final reckoning. Either justice would prevail, or more lives would be lost in its pursuit. Chen landed at Václav Havel Airport late Wednesday evening. The winter air was sharp. The city bathed in golden lamplight and shadows that stretched like secrets down every alley. She immediately contacted Inspector Carol Novak, the Czech officer heading local efforts. "We've located 3 American private investigators," Novak informed her as they drove past Prague Castle. "They're working for William Thornton. They've been surveilling Grand Hotel Bohemia since yesterday." "Where is Thornton staying?" "Hotel Augustine, 5 blocks from the Bohemia. He arrived this morning." Chen's heart sank. "Have you spoken with him?" "Not yet. We were hoping you could convince him to stand down." As the car moved through the city's ancient streets, Chen studied recent surveillance photos of Vincent Koff. He looked different. Gray hair, wire-framed glasses, designer coat. But those cold, calculating eyes hadn't changed. It was still him. The same man from the 1998 mall security badge photo. The same man who had overseen the torture and murder of 2 innocent siblings. "When is he expected to check in?" Chen asked. "Tomorrow afternoon. The conference starts Friday morning." They arrived at Hotel Augustine just after 9 p.m. Chen approached the front desk, flashing her Chicago PD badge. "I need to speak with one of your guests. This concerns an ongoing criminal investigation involving American citizens." The receptionist hesitated, then called the manager, who reluctantly agreed to contact Thornton's room. A few tense minutes later, he emerged from the elevator. He looked like a man who had traveled not just across the ocean, but through hell. Unshaven, his face gaunt, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. 7 years of grief and rage had aged him well beyond his 65 years. "Detective Chen," he said bitterly, "what are you doing in Prague?" "I'm here to stop you from ruining everything we've worked for," she replied. "We're this close, Mr. Thornton. Koff will be arrested legally. We're coordinating with the FBI, Czech police, and Interpol. Everything is in place." Thornton's jaw clenched. "Legal procedures failed my children for 7 years. I'm not about to watch that happen again." They moved to the hotel bar, where the conversation continued over a table tucked in the corner. Chen laid out the full scope of the operation. International warrants, evidence submissions, surveillance logs, and cross-agency coordination. "If you approach Koff," she warned, "he'll vanish. You'll lose your only chance." Thornton's voice cracked. "He tortured my children for hours, then left them in the dirt like garbage. And he's been drinking wine, buying suits, walking free. I don't care about warrants." Chen tried to appeal to what remained. "What about your daughter, your wife?" He looked away. "My wife died 2 years ago. Cancer. Doctors said her immune system was already fragile, but the stress, losing Jessica and Joshua, it destroyed her." He paused. "My daughter blames me, says I gave up too soon." Chen sat in silence, feeling the weight of his devastation. She reached across the table. "Then help us do this the right way. Testify. Stand in court and make sure Koff never breathes free air again." He shook his head slowly. "He needs to suffer, like my kids did." Inspector Novak arrived and joined the table. "Mr. Thornton, I have children too. I understand. But if you kill Koff, you become a criminal yourself." "I've made peace with that," Thornton muttered. Novak tried another angle. "Our prisons are not gentle. If we convict Koff here for money laundering, he'll serve 20 years before he's extradited to the U.S. "A long time," Chen added. "And once he's back in the States, he'll face life without parole. He'll never be free again." Thornton sat back, silent for a long while. "And if he escapes? If lawyers twist the facts?" Chen opened a folder and slid it across the table. Frank Morrison's confession, forensic reports, witness statements. Koff can't hide behind lawyers anymore. His uncle Dmitry Vulov is under investigation too. He has no shield left. Just then, Novak's radio crackled. "Koff just checked into Grand Hotel Bohemia. Room 412. The tension in the bar thickened like fog. "Is surveillance in place?" Chen asked. "Yes, but we can't arrest him until the paperwork is officially received, or he commits a new crime on Czech soil." Thornton stood abruptly. "Then I'll handle it myself." Chen grabbed his arm. Please, give us 24 hours. I've waited 7 years. I'm ending this tonight. Novak tried to detain him, but they had no legal basis. Thornton wasn't under arrest. He walked into the night and vanished into the labyrinth of Prague's narrow medieval streets. Chen and Novak followed, but quickly lost him in the maze of twisting alleys and back passages. "We need to warn Koff," Chen said. "No," Novak replied. "If we approach him, he'll know he's being watched. Better to intercept Thornton first." Plainclothes officers were stationed discreetly around Grand Hotel Bohemia. Chen called Thornton's phone repeatedly. No answer. At 11:03 p.m., hotel security radioed an incident. "American man demanding access to room 412. We're escorting him out." Chen and Novak arrived to find Thornton in the lobby, shouting at 2 guards and the front desk manager. "He's here," Thornton yelled. "Room 412, the man who murdered my children." The manager was stern. "Sir, you are threatening our guests. If you do not leave, we will call the police." "We are the police," Novak said, flashing her badge. "We'll handle it." They escorted Thornton outside. Still, he refused to leave. "I'm staying right here," he said. "All night if I have to." When Vincent Koff exited the elevator into the polished, sunlit lobby of the Grand Hotel Bohemia, he appeared every inch the international businessman. His tailored charcoal suit fit flawlessly, the subtle glint of his gold cufflinks and a platinum wristwatch catching the morning light. He moved with the calculated ease of someone used to being respected, untouchable. But today, he had no idea he was walking into a carefully staged confrontation, years in the making. William Thornton sat in a sleek leather chair facing the elevators, dressed in a conservative black suit, his eyes sharp and sunken from too many sleepless nights. Clutched in his hand was a briefcase, its contents not documents or contracts, but printed memories of his murdered children. As soon as Koff stepped into view, Thornton stood. "Vincent Koff," he said, voice low and restrained. Koff turned sharply, his body tightening as if some predator instinct alerted him to danger. His expression froze as he recognized the face. Older now, hardened by loss. "I believe you have me mistaken for someone else," Koff replied, his Eastern European accent faint but deliberate, rehearsed. Thornton opened the briefcase and pulled out 2 photographs. "I'm William Thornton. These are my children, Jessica and Joshua. You killed them." The surrounding lobby grew still. Guests paused mid-conversation, their eyes drifting toward the confrontation unfolding between 2 sharply dressed men. Koff tried to sidestep, but Thornton moved with him. "You tortured them in a mall storage room, then buried them beneath a layer of concrete. We found their bodies. We have forensic evidence." A confession. Koff raised an eyebrow. "I don't know who you are or what you're talking about." Chen stepped forward from a nearby alcove, signaling to Novak's undercover officers scattered throughout the lobby. They discreetly adjusted positions, blocking every exit. Chen nodded subtly at Thornton, urging him to continue. Thornton held up a crime scene photo showing the concrete burial site. "Recognize this? Your accomplice, Frank Morrison, detailed how you threatened his family, how you kept my children's corpses in a freezer for 2 years. You poured this concrete. You orchestrated everything." Koff's mask of denial slipped momentarily, a twitch in his jaw betraying a flicker of irritation. "Morrison? He's the killer. He's trying to frame me." "No," Thornton snapped. "You killed them because they walked in on your robbery operation. Joshua knew one of the thieves, Tommy Benedetto. You couldn't risk being identified." Koff's shoulders tightened. "This conversation is over." Thornton pulled out the autopsy photos, hands trembling slightly. "Look at what you did to them. Blunt force trauma to their skulls, broken ribs, and shattered arms from defensive wounds. You tortured them. You made them suffer." Koff glanced down, and for the briefest moment, his icy facade cracked. His lips curled in something between a smirk and contempt. "Your children should have minded their business," he muttered. That was all Chen needed. She gave Novak a signal. Officers moved swiftly, but before they reached him, Thornton lunged, fury exploding after years of silent grief. He grabbed Koff by the collar and punched him hard across the face. Koff stumbled backward, blood spraying across the polished marble floor. "You bastard!" Thornton roared. "They were just kids," hotel guests screamed, several backing away from the escalating scene. Security tried to intervene, but Novak's officers were already separating the two men. Thornton struggled against them, veins bulging in his neck. "He told them their daddy wasn't coming," he shouted, tears mingling with rage. "He said I wouldn't save them." Koff wiped blood from his face and smiled, lips stained crimson. "They cried for you. I told them you didn't care enough to come." Thornton lunged again, but this time Chen caught him by the arm, reinforced by two officers. "No," she shouted. "He's not worth it. You got him. He's done. Your children have justice now." As paramedics arrived to treat Koff's injuries, he hissed a final taunt. "They weren't the first, you know. There were others." Everyone froze. Chen's voice dropped to a whisper. "What others?" But Koff collapsed onto the gurney, unconscious from blood loss, before he could say more. Back at Prague Police Headquarters, Koff sat handcuffed in a sterile interview room, nose bandaged, lip split. With his Russian attorney at his side, he remained infuriatingly calm. "My client was assaulted," the lawyer said. "He was arrested under false pretenses. He admits to no American crimes." Chen leaned across the table. "You said there were others. How many people have you killed?" Koff's eyes were two glacial pits of amusement. "Prove it." While Koff stonewalled, Inspector Novak made headway. Czech financial investigators traced years of money laundering back to Koff's company, transactions involving dummy corporations, encrypted wire transfers, shell bank accounts in Luxembourg and Cyprus. It was enough for a 20-year prison sentence in Prague alone. "He's going away," Novak told Chen, even without the murder charges. But Chen wasn't done. She called FBI agent Santos back in Washington. He slipped. He said there were other victims. "We need to reopen cold cases connected to mall properties owned by the Vulov syndicate." "We'll get started immediately," Santos said. "With that confession and Morrison's testimony, we might get more victims identified." Later that day, Thornton was released without charges, thanks to Novak's intervention and public sympathy. As he stood on the Charles Bridge, looking out at the Vltava River under gray Czech skies, Chen approached. "You didn't kill him," she said. "I wanted to," Thornton replied. "But you were right. I saw what he was. No soul, no humanity." "He'll die in prison," Chen said. "Not today, but soon." Thornton nodded. "Thank you, Detective, for everything." As she walked away, Chen knew the case wasn't truly over. There were other malls, other disappearances, other hidden graves, perhaps. But today, one monster had finally been stopped. After 7 years of silence, the truth had clawed its way out of concrete and lies, demanding to be heard. Justice had begun. "We need to investigate everyone who went missing from Millennium Mall or its surrounding areas between 1995 and 1999, Chen instructed as she ended her call with Santos. "Already on it," he responded. "We're combing through all the open missing persons cases from that period." That evening, Chen sat beside William Thornton in the waiting room of a Prague police station. The fluorescent lights above hummed softly as muted conversation from nearby officers filtered through the air. Thornton, though visibly exhausted, carried a calmer expression than she'd ever seen. A weight had lifted, just not fully. "Did you get what you needed?" Chen asked quietly, breaking the silence. Thornton exhaled slowly, staring ahead. "I saw his eyes when he looked at those autopsy photos. No remorse, no flicker of regret or guilt. Just this cold satisfaction at the suffering he caused." Chen hesitated. "Does that bring any closure?" Thornton shook his head. "Closure's too soft a word. It confirms something I've known for years. He's not a man. He's a predator. My children died at the hands of something monstrous." Chen reviewed her notes from the day's events. Koff's quiet admission about other victims wasn't just bluster. It carried weight. She looked up. "Mr. Thornton, this investigation may reveal that Jessica and Joshua weren't alone. If we uncover more victims, more families, are you ready for that truth?" Thornton didn't speak for a long moment. When he finally did, his voice was hoarse but resolute. "Detective, if that maniac hurt others the way he hurt mine, then every parent deserves to know. Even if it tears them apart, they deserve the truth." Just then, her phone buzzed. Agent Santos was on the line. "Chen, we've found something disturbing," he said urgently. "Missing persons report from December 1997. 2 college students, Michael and Sarah Rodriguez, disappeared from Millennium Mall while Christmas shopping. Both were 21, attending the University of Illinois. Same location, same time of year, and same pattern." Chen's stomach dropped. "Another case just like the Thorntons." "Identical," Santos confirmed grimly. "The case went cold after 6 months. No evidence, no witnesses. But the more we dig, the more it's clear. We're dealing with a serial killer." Back in Chicago by Friday evening, Chen met Santos at FBI headquarters. They went over the Rodriguez files meticulously. The details mirrored the Thornton case in unsettling precision. Michael and Sarah entered the mall around 2:30 p.m. on December 20th, 1997, Santos explained. They were seen buying gifts, drinking coffee, and then vanished. No exit footage. Their car was found undisturbed in the parking structure. Chen flipped through the files. Any link to Koff? The Rodriguez family hired a private investigator in early '98. He flagged Koff as a person of interest after hearing multiple staffers mention suspicious behavior. That investigator died in a car crash 3 months later. Chen looked up sharply. "Another convenient accident." Santos nodded solemnly. "That's not all. We've uncovered 6 more disappearances between 1995 and 1999. Same location, same demographic. All during the holiday shopping season." Chen scanned the new list. Lisa and David Kim, December 1995. Jennifer Walsh, December 1996. Michael and Sarah Rodriguez, December 1997. Jessica and Joshua Thornton, December 1998. Amanda Chen, December 1999. A chilling timeline of annual disappearances. All young adults, Chen noted, mostly Asian or mixed race, except the Thorntons. All from financially secure families. Koff was choosing victims with resources, Santos suggested. Maybe to leverage for ransom initially. But something shifted. It became personal. Torture, control, psychological domination. But no ransoms were ever demanded, Chen pointed out, which means it was never really about money. He did this for the power. She called William Thornton with the latest developments. "Mr. Thornton, we've identified at least 8 more victims, all vanished from Millennium Mall during the same period." Thornton was silent. When he finally spoke, his voice broke. How many families have suffered like mine?" "We're reaching out to them now," Chen said. "They deserve answers." Over the weekend, she interviewed surviving family members. Every home carried the weight of unhealed grief. Lisa Kim's parents had divorced 2 years after her disappearance. David Kim's father had taken his own life in 2001. Jennifer Walsh's mother was in long-term psychiatric care. Miguel Rodriguez, brother of Sarah, was filled with rage. "We tried to tell the police," he said through clenched teeth. "Sarah wasn't the type to run away. She was weeks away from getting engaged. She had plans, a future, and no one listened." Each family offered new fragments of the same story. Responsible, connected, hopeful young adults. No indication of suicidal ideation or desire to disappear. Chen organized a joint meeting with all 8 families on Sunday night at the Chicago Police Department. A long conference table filled the room, surrounded by tearful parents and siblings. William Thornton stood to speak. "I know what it's like to live with unanswered questions," he began, voice steady. "To replay every moment, every decision, and wonder what you missed. I want you all to know, none of you are alone anymore." Chen presented the assembled evidence, timelines, testimonies, and connections to Koff. We believe your children were all murdered by Vincent Koff during his time managing operations at Millennium Mall. Robert Kim raised the inevitable question. Are our children buried there too? We don't know yet, Chen answered truthfully. But we've obtained federal warrants to excavate multiple sections of the mall. We're treating the entire complex as a potential burial site. Monday morning, forensic teams assembled at Millennium Mall. Dr. Harper joined Chen, overseeing excavation and scanning procedures with ground-penetrating radar. If Koff disposed of bodies regularly, Harper said, we'll see consistency, depths, materials, even post-mortem treatment patterns. They began with areas surrounding the Thornton burial site. The floors groaned under equipment weight, but beneath them lay years of secrets. Concrete slabs gave way to hollow echoes. By Tuesday afternoon, they found the first anomaly. Radar signatures suggested another concealed cavity. And then, shovels struck bone. 2 skeletons lay side by side in a storage room that had been sealed during the 1998 renovations. The space was hidden behind layers of concrete and steel, long undisturbed until forensic teams broke through with tools and delicate brushes. The musty air carried the scent of old concrete, rust, and decay. Dr. Harper crouched beside the remains, lifting a partially buried bracelet and a wallet with brittle leather. She studied the contents carefully, then turned to Detective Chen. These are most likely Michael and Sarah Rodriguez, she said softly. Male and female, early 20s. Clothing and personal items are consistent with their December 1997 disappearance. Chen felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She stepped aside and made the call nobody wanted to make. We found Michael and Sarah, she told Elena Rodriguez, voice trembling. On the other end, Elena's cry broke the silence of the crime scene. My babies! They've been there all along, so close to home. For the rest of the week, excavation crews worked tirelessly. Another sealed storage alcove revealed 2 more skeletons, identified as Lisa and David Kim, missing since December 1995. Jennifer Walsh's remains were found next, buried alone near a disused loading dock passage. Amanda Chen, the final victim, had been hidden in a crawl space accessible only through collapsed maintenance shafts. Unlike the others, Amanda suffered a single gunshot wound to the head. Clear, precise, execution style. Dr. Harper observed, Kossoff's methods evolved. Earlier attacks were violent and impulsive. Later ones, coldly efficient. As Chen surveyed the evidence, horror deepened. What began as sporadic disappearances had become a serial pattern. Kossoff's brutality had grown into calculated executions. By Friday afternoon, the remains of all 8 victims had been recovered. 8 families finally received tragic confirmation of long-buried nightmares. In Prague, Vincent Koff remained in custody. Chen coordinated with Prague police and Agent Santos, now armed with evidence for 8 murder counts. Inspector Novak remarked, "This man is a predator. The Czech Republic won't let him go easily." Santos arranged a collaboration between Czech prosecutors and the U.S. Justice Department, ensuring Koff would spend the rest of his life behind bars. But Chen needed answers, and returned to Prague for one final interrogation. Inside the interview room, Koff sat calmly behind reinforced glass. His Russian lawyer bristled, insisting Kossoff would not speak about American crimes. Chen placed 8 crime scene photographs on the table. Names, dates, faces. Michael and Sarah Rodriguez, Lisa and David Kim, Jennifer Walsh, Amanda Chen, Jessica and Joshua Thornton. Koff's gaze never wavered. "You've been busy, Detective." "Why kill them?" Chen asked. He shrugged. "Business sometimes comes with complications." "They were college students," Chen replied. "They weren't threats." "They were entitled American kids," Kossoff said blandly. "They thought money, lawyers, and luxury protected them." Chen clenched her fists. "You destroyed families." Families move on, he said. Money fixes most problems. Not this time, she said. You face 8 murder charges. A supermax sentence in a U.S. prison. Total isolation. Kosov's confidence cracked. The Czech Republic won't extradite if I face death row. We don't need it, Chen said coldly. Illinois abolished capital punishment. You'll live in a supermax cell. No visits, no windows, just silence. Kosov's composure finally shattered. For the first time, fear flickered behind his eyes. Maybe I can cooperate, he admitted. Chen leaned forward. Other victims. Koff exchanged a look with his lawyer, who hesitated but nodded. Yes, other cities. Other business complications. Chen's blood turned cold. The killings at Millennium Mall were only the beginning. Back in Chicago, Agent Santos launched a nationwide probe. They cross-checked missing persons cases from cities tied to the Vulov, family's business investments. Detroit, Cleveland, Minneapolis, St. Louis, Denver, Phoenix, Las Vegas, Portland, Seattle, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Miami. Reports poured in, dozens of similar cases. Young adults vanishing during holiday shopping in major malls. Detroit reported 4, Cleveland 6, Minneapolis 3. All matched the Thornton and Rodriguez patterns. We might be looking at 50 to 60 victims, Santos said gravely. Chen stared at the maps and files. One man, dozens of lives extinguished. The truth was staggering. By Sunday night, she boarded a flight to Quantico for a multi-city task force meeting. 30 investigators gathered in an FBI war room, surrounded by victim photographs, timelines, and dot maps. FBI profiler Dr. James Patterson began. Kosov is a rare breed of serial killer, organized, mobile, protected by financial and mob infrastructure. He adapted, evolved, and became methodical, not for profit, but for psychological dominance. Chen surveyed the room. Dozens of faces looked back, young, hopeful, lifetimes stolen. She whispered, "We'll find them all, and ensure every family knows the truth." Justice had begun. The weight of justice had taken nearly a decade to find its balance. But on a quiet spring morning in a packed federal courtroom in downtown Chicago, the reckoning had finally arrived. Vincent Kosov, known in the underworld as Vincent Koff, financial consultant and secret killer, stood shackled before the bench, clad in a standard-issue orange prison jumpsuit. His once polished demeanor was gone, replaced by the blank stare of a man who had seen the collapse of his empire and now stood at the mercy of the justice system he had long evaded. Across the courtroom, rows upon rows of grieving families sat shoulder to shoulder, united in unimaginable pain. Each person in that room had lost someone to Koff's hidden atrocities. Sons, daughters, siblings, young lives snuffed out during what should have been routine shopping trips, now reduced to photographs displayed on poster boards at the front of the courtroom. Among those sitting in the front row was William Thornton. His face, hardened by years of loss and sleepless nights, betrayed no emotion as he stared at the man who had tortured and murdered his children. Judge Patricia Martinez looked over her glasses at the defendant. "Mr. Kosov, you are here today to plead guilty to 53 counts of first-degree murder, along with numerous charges of kidnapping, torture, money laundering, racketeering, and obstruction of justice. Do you fully understand the charges brought against you?" Kosov nodded, his voice subdued and nearly inaudible. "Yes, Your Honor. And do you understand that by entering a plea of guilty, you forfeit your right to a trial by jury and accept life imprisonment without the possibility of parole?" "Yes, Your Honor." From the prosecution table, Assistant U.S. Attorney David Chen, no relation to Detective Chen, stood and addressed the court. "Your Honor, the evidence in this case is both overwhelming and horrifying. For a period of 5 years, the defendant used his position within a complex network of commercial real estate and international finance to conceal one of the most calculated and prolific killing sprees in modern history." He clicked a remote, projecting an image on the courtroom screen. It was a grid of faces, young, vibrant, full of promise. 53 victims, Chen continued, all between the ages of 18 and 25. Many were college students, others were recent graduates or working professionals. All of them had families who reported them missing. All of them vanished without a trace, and all of them were ultimately discovered buried beneath properties tied to the defendant's business interests. As the slideshow advanced, photographs of each victim were displayed. Jessica and Joshua Thornton appeared early in the sequence. Jessica in her graduation gown, Joshua in his varsity soccer jersey. William Thornton lowered his head and clasped his hands tightly, his jaw clenched as their smiling faces flickered on screen. The defendant didn't just murder these young people, Prosecutor Chen continued. He tortured many of them. He held some for hours, others for days. His confessions included descriptions of calculated cruelty, broken bones, defensive wounds, binding injuries, each detail underscoring his disregard for human life, and all while continuing to attend board meetings, broker property deals, and live a lavish lifestyle across multiple countries. In the gallery, audible gasps and quiet sobs echoed with each slide. One woman had to be helped from the room, overcome by emotion at the sight of her daughter's final photograph. Prosecutor Chen pressed on. This man operated with impunity. He crossed state lines, used shell corporations, and leveraged international banking loopholes to stay ahead of investigators. And when victims became liabilities, when they saw too much or simply asked the wrong questions, he silenced them. The screen faded to black. Judge Martinez turned back to the defendant. Mr. Kosoff, before I impose sentencing, do you wish to address the court? Kosoff's lawyer, a pale, tight-lipped Russian national, stood and shook his head. My client waives his right to allocution, Your Honor. So noted. Judge Martinez looked out at the families. No sentence I impose today can undo the tragedy that has affected so many lives, but I can ensure that this man never harms another soul again. She turned back to the defendant. Vincent Kosoff, for your crimes, this court hereby sentences you to 53 consecutive life terms in federal custody, without the possibility of parole. You will be remanded to the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility in Florence, Colorado, where you will spend the remainder of your life in solitary confinement. This sentence shall be carried out immediately. Gasps and sobs filled the room. Several family members clasped hands. William Thornton remained silent, staring straight ahead, his face pale but resolute. After the court adjourned, families gathered in the hallway outside. Some wept openly, others embraced. For the first time in years, there was a sense of closure, though not peace. That would take longer, maybe lifetimes. Detective Chen approached William Thornton. I promised you justice, Mr. Thornton. He nodded, tears finally welling in his eyes. You kept your word. I just wish it hadn't cost so many others. Chen looked out the courthouse window. The sky was clear, the city quiet. The case that had consumed nearly a decade of her life had come to an end, not just with an arrest, but with the truth laid bare for the world to see. The Millennium Mall murders were no longer whispers in cold case files or faded photographs on missing persons boards. They were acknowledged, avenged, and remembered. In the months that followed, a national task force named the Kosoff Victims Project was created to support families affected by the crimes and to improve interstate coordination on missing persons investigations. Memorials were erected at each site where remains had been found. Scholarships, community centers, and public safety programs were launched in the names of the victims. Vincent Kosoff would never again walk free, speak to another victim, or touch another life. He had built his empire on silence and shadows, but the truth had brought it all crashing down. And in its place, something new began to grow. A legacy of remembrance, of justice, and of hope for the families who had waited so long to hear the words. We found them. We know the truth, and they will never be forgotten. The courtroom held a heavy silence as the final moments of a historic trial unfolded. The prosecutor, standing before the bench, delivered the closing statements with unwavering resolve. "Your Honor," he began, his voice echoing across the tense gallery, "this defendant didn't just kill, he tortured, he tormented. He inflicted prolonged agony upon his victims. 53 young lives, all full of promise, deliberately extinguished." He gestured toward the photo boards displaying senior portraits, candid snapshots, and family photos. Each of these faces belonged to a son or daughter, a brother, a sister. This man buried them in concrete and lies across the basements of shopping centers in America. And while families clung to hope for years, Mr. Kosov lived lavishly under another name in Russia. The defense attempted to shift the narrative. "Your Honor, my client grew up surrounded by crime. He was recruited into organized operations before he had a chance to make moral judgments on his own. His actions, while undeniably criminal, were influenced by a deep network of dangerous individuals. He was following orders." Judge Martinez cut in sharply. "Mr. Roberts, your client confessed under oath to personally torturing and murdering each of the 53 victims. This was not simply following orders, this was an initiative. These were choices made over years, spanning cities and states." Detective Claire Chen was called to the stand. She described the origins of the investigation in vivid detail, how the buried remains of Jessica and Joshua Thornton had cracked open a long-dormant mystery and exposed a serial killing operation of national scale. "If not for a security guard's accidental discovery," Chen said, "dozens of families might never have learned the truth. The system had failed them for years. But once we understood the pattern, we traced it city by city, grave by grave." William Thornton stepped up next, his voice steady but marked by the wear of grief. "Jessica and Joshua were tortured for hours. Koff kept their bodies in a freezer for 2 years before dumping them beneath a mall floor. I used to imagine they'd just run away, that they might return someday. But they were dead all along, buried not far from where I had searched for them." He paused to collect himself, then continued. "But their deaths brought light to so many others. They became the reason 51 other families finally found peace. That's not justice, but it's something. And in this darkness, something is better than nothing." Other family members shared their stories. Elena Rodriguez recounted 7 years of unanswered prayers. Robert Kim spoke of his son David's plans to become a surgeon. Jennifer Walsh's mother wept through the memory of her daughter's acceptance letter to a prestigious teaching program. Dozens of grieving relatives took the stand. Their collective anguish painted a devastating portrait of what Kosov had stolen. Not just lives, but futures, dreams, and family legacies. Judge Martinez listened solemnly, eyes steady, taking in every testimony with gravitas. When the statements concluded, the judge addressed the defendant directly. "Mr. Kosov, you admitted to heinous crimes, crimes so abhorrent that they challenge the boundaries of human decency. Do you wish to make a final statement?" Kosov stood, clad in an orange jumpsuit, shackled at the wrists and ankles. His face was worn, his confidence shattered. "I accept responsibility," he said, eyes low. "I cannot undo what I've done." The judge then delivered her ruling. "Vincent Kosov, for the murder of 53 young individuals and for the pain you've inflicted on their families and this nation, I sentence you to 53 life terms in federal prison, to be served consecutively, without the possibility of parole. You will spend the rest of your life in isolation, reflecting on the weight of your choices." A wave of relief swept through the courtroom. Applause broke out as families embraced one another, tears falling freely. Justice had taken years, but it had arrived at last. Outside, reporters gathered. Detective Chen addressed the press. "This case represents the power of persistence. When we think missing persons cases are unsolvable, we must remember that evidence can resurface, that families should never be forgotten." William Thornton established the Jessica and Joshua Thornton Foundation to assist other families of missing persons. The organization offered funding for forensic testing, search operations, legal aid, and trauma counseling. "We got the truth, thanks to relentless detectives," Thornton told reporters. "Now, we're paying it forward." Months later, Chen traveled to ADX Florence, Colorado, where Kossoff had been incarcerated. The Supermax prison held the nation's most dangerous criminals. Kossoff now lives in a 7 by 12-foot cell, locked in solitude for 23 hours a day, with only a slit for light and a slot for food. Through bulletproof glass, Chen stared at the man who had haunted her investigation for over 3 years. "Do you regret confessing?" she asked. Kossoff, looking older, his hair thinned and graying, replied in a subdued voice, "Every day I see them. The faces, the screaming, their parents. Their eyes haunt me more than the walls of this place. Prison's not the punishment, it's the remembering." Chen left knowing he'd never hurt anyone again. The Millennium Mall was eventually torn down. In its place stood a solemn park, quiet and peaceful. 53 trees had been planted, each one bearing a plaque with a victim's name. In the center, 2 trees stood side by side, dedicated to Jessica and Joshua Thornton. On the 10th anniversary of the twins' disappearance, hundreds gathered at the memorial park. William Thornton, now graying and stooped, addressed the crowd. "Jessica and Joshua would have been 32 today. Maybe they'd be married. Maybe I'd be a grandfather. That future was stolen. But they're not forgotten. None of these children are." Detective Chen stood quietly in the crowd, reflecting on the journey. From the moment Tommy Rodriguez had unearthed that chain in the concrete, to the confrontation in Prague, to the trial, the case had altered the course of her career and her life. Dr. Elizabeth Harper's work on the forensic side led to major innovations in victim identification and trauma analysis. Her team's breakthroughs were now being used nationwide to help close other cold cases. Frank Morrison, the man who had once kept silent out of fear, had served his time. After prison, he devoted himself to the Thornton Foundation, offering investigative support to other families. "I'll never forgive myself for what I didn't do," he told Chen. "But I can use the rest of my life trying to make it right." Chen eventually transitioned into the FBI, where she headed the Cold Case and Missing Persons Division. She lectured nationwide about the Kossoff investigation and the importance of interagency cooperation. "There's no such thing as a hopeless case," she often said. "Only evidence, waiting to be uncovered." The horror of Kossoff's crimes would never fully fade. But through perseverance, compassion, and truth, a community of survivors had turned pain into purpose. And for every parent who now planted a tree, lit a candle, or whispered their child's name into the wind, the world was a little less dark. 5 years had passed since Vincent Kossoff, known by many as Victor Klov, had been sentenced to spend the remainder of his life in solitary confinement at ADX Florence, the nation's most secure federal prison. On an overcast morning, Detective Claire Chen received an international call from Prague Police, the agency that had helped initiate his extradition years earlier. "Detective Chen, we've received confirmation from U.S. authorities," said the Czech liaison. "Vincent Kossoff died in his cell last night. Cause of death appears to be natural, likely heart failure. He was 57. Chen sat silently for a moment, letting the weight of the news settle in. Then she dialed William Thornton. The man who had lost everything to Kossoff's cruelty deserved to hear it directly from her. "He's gone, Mr. Thornton. Kossoff died in prison last night." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Thornton replied, his voice heavy with reflection. "I don't feel satisfaction, Detective. I feel empty. His death doesn't bring Jessica and Joshua back. But I suppose it's something that he can never harm another family's child again." Kossoff's body went unclaimed. No family stepped forward, no friends, no allies. He was buried in an unmarked grave in the prison cemetery. No headstone, no ceremony. His final resting place was cold, anonymous, and forgotten. In stark contrast, the names of his victims lived on. Their families had built foundations, held memorials, and created scholarships. They had chosen remembrance over vengeance. The Millennium Mall investigation would later be cited as a turning point in modern law enforcement. The FBI integrated the case into its national training curriculum, highlighting the complex web of interagency collaboration, forensic innovation, and sheer human determination that led to Kossoff's arrest and conviction. Police departments across the country adopted new protocols for sharing data across jurisdictions, inspired by what had been uncovered during those long, painful years. Detective Chen, after dedicating 2 decades to the Chicago Police Department and making history with her work on the Clove investigation, retired in 2015. Her final report, distributed widely within law enforcement communities, closed with a powerful statement: "Justice delayed is not justice denied. Every missing person deserves to be found. Every family deserves the truth. And every killer, no matter how far they run, will ultimately answer for their crimes." William Thornton passed away peacefully in 2018 at the age of 81. His obituary told the story of a man transformed by grief into an advocate. The foundation he created in memory of his children had helped over 300 families find missing loved ones. Jessica and Joshua's legacy lived on, not just in stone and ceremony, but in the lives they helped save. On a crisp December morning in 2020, as snow blanketed the ground, Claire Chen returned to the park built on the ruins of the Millennium Mall. The 53 memorial trees had grown tall and proud, their trunks thick, their branches reaching skyward like the dreams of those they honored. She stood silently before the twin markers for Jessica and Joshua, her heart full. They were never forgotten, and they never would be.